Vanchkapatarubhyascha kripas sindhubhyevacha Paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Hare Krishna. Okay. All right, so here we go. Last night we reached verse number 20, which was the end of the second small section of the first chapter. That was to do with, that second section was to do with the blowing of conch shells by the Pandavas and their associated soldiers, and the effect that had on the Kauravas. It was quite devastating. And we concluded on verse 20, in which Arjuna is looking at the arrangement there on the battlefield, but he wants to look more carefully. He wants to look closer. So he's just about to ask Lord Krishna to take the chariot in closer so he can see particularly who's there on the other side. And the last verse, 20, was the verse, it's a really nice verse, which mentions Hanuman. Hanuman was on the flag of Arjuna. And as we read from the purport, that was very encouraging, because Hanuman, of course, he's the servant of Lord Ram. And even though it's just his picture there on the flag, but with transcendental personalities like Hanuman, we understand that when his picture is there, then he is there. And we didn't mention last night, but there are statements elsewhere, like in Mahabharata, that at one point, when Arjuna got into difficulty, well, at some points, when Arjuna got into difficulty, Hanuman on the flag would roar, and in this way shock the enemy. And at one point, when Arjuna got into difficulty, then it is said Hanuman jumped off the flag and he was ready to take action against the adversaries who were shocked when they saw Hanuman, and he roared also. So his presence in different ways, even in just not just some sort of representational form, just some picture, which in the case of ordinary people, it's different, completely different from the person who's being depicted. But in this case, Larissa Perivot na Zume. Perivot na Zoom. Na Facebook net perivota. Хорошо. Yes. So Hanuman was there, even directly, personally, to give his support, encouragement, and even more than that, to actually take action. And what to speak, of course, that Lord Krishna was there. Lord Krishna was there personally driving the chariot of Arjuna. And and of course, he is non-different from Lord Ram. So, and wherever Krishna is, the goddess of fortune is. So Prabhupada was discussing these things in the purport of verse 20. Very nice. That Arjuna was fully supported, protected. Lord Krishna, Lord Ram, the goddess of fortune, Hanuman, they were all there to help. And so Arjuna could avail himself of that help by praying for mercy like that. So Prabhupada explains it's actually in a class on this verse 20 in Bhaktivedanta Manna, 1973. I read part of what Prabhupada said last night. I'm going to read it again. Vaishnavism is like that. Mahajano yena gita sapanta. Vaishnav should follow his previous Mahajan, authority. Arjuna is fighting for Krishna. He is following the previous fighting Acharya, Hanumanji. Therefore, he has depicted his flag with Hanuman, that Hanumanji, kindly help me. This is Vaishnavism. I have come here to fight for Lord Krishna. You fought also for the Lord. Kindly help me. This is the idea, Kapidwaja. So before performing any activities, the Vaishnav should always pray to the previous Acharya, kindly help me. The Vaishnav is always thinking himself helpless, and begging help from the previous Acharya. So like that, we concluded that section, which was mainly focused on the Pandavas blowing their conch shells and the effect it had on the enemy, and then just the idea arising of Arjuna that Krishna might take the chariot in between the armies so he could see clearly who was there on the other side. Right, so this brings us then to verse 21, and actually it's 21 and 22 together. This subsection here, it's the third subsection in basically in the first half, the first part of the first chapter. And this subsection is titled Krishna as Bhakta Vatsala. Bhakta Vatsala. Bhakta, of course, means devotee, and Vatsala means friend, like intimate friend who will extend himself for his friend. Krishna is the friend of the devotee, and Krishna will extend himself for his devotee, in this case Arjuna. So this is two verses together. Let's just read the translation. Arjuna said, O infallible one, please draw my chariot between the two armies so that I may see those present here who desire to fight, and with whom I must contend in this great trial of arms. Right, so that's verses 21 and 22. And we can note that Lord Krishna is addressed here by Arjuna with another name, a different name, Achyuta, the infallible one. Yesterday, in those two verses, Lord Krishna was addressed by Arjuna as Rishikesh, the master of the senses, controller of, and even proprietor of, the owner of the senses. And the idea there was from those verses last night that therefore Krishna is going to control, direct the senses, and in this way the functioning of Arjuna, because of Arjuna being a great devotee. And in this way, Arjuna being directed, guided by the Lord, Arjuna would certainly be successful. So, like we said, this section, subsection from verse 21 to verse 27, it has been titled Krishna as Bhaktavatsala. It's a fact that Krishna as Bhaktavatsala, it's mainly really these first two verses right here, 21 and 22, where Krishna is clearly acting as the friend, the merciful friend, who is neglecting his own position in order to help, to facilitate his friend, Arjuna. Yes, so in the purport itself, in the first paragraph, particularly in the first paragraph, Srila Prabhupada addresses this point. Let us just read a bit of what Srila Prabhupada says. So this is first paragraph from the beginning. Although Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, out of his causeless mercy, he was engaged in the service of his friend. He never fails in his affection for his devotees, and thus he is addressed herein as infallible. That's interesting. He's not addressed as infallible just because he's the most powerful and he can confront anybody and defeat anybody and everybody if he wants. But he's being addressed here by Arjuna as Achyuta, infallible, because he never lets his devotees down. He never fails in his affection for his devotees. So Prabhupada continues, as charioteer, he had to carry out the orders of Arjuna. And since he did not hesitate to do so, he's addressed as infallible. Although he accepted the position of a charioteer for his devotee, his supreme position was not challenged. In all circumstances, he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Rishikesh, the Lord of the total senses. The relationship between the Lord and his servitor is very sweet and transcendental. The servitor is always ready to render service to the Lord, and similarly, the Lord is always seeking an opportunity to render some service to the devotee. He takes greater pleasure in his pure devotees assuming the advantageous position of ordering him than he does in being the giver of orders. Since he is master, everyone is under his orders, and no one is above him to order him. But when he finds that a pure devotee is ordering him, he obtains transcendental pleasure, although he's the infallible master in all circumstances. So that's nice. That's really very nice. That's just extremely nice. How this very deep and intimate and very personal aspect of the nature of the Lord and the nature of the relationship between the Lord and his pure devotee, although it's so intimate and personal and deep, but it's being brought out here right in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada, let me just read something that Srila Prabhupada says in a class on these two verses, again in Bhaktivedanta Manna in 1973. I might have even been there. I was there for some of those classes. I was staying in our temple in central London. I was temple commander, so-called. But we would come out regularly, and Prabhupada was giving Bhagavad Gita class every morning on this first chapter. So anyway, Prabhupada says, another meaning of achyuta. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Arjuna knows that I am not the controller, I am the controlled. He is a devotee, and he knows his position. Therefore, anyway, just listen, just listen carefully. Therefore, he is now trying to control Krishna. He is ordering Krishna. Now, despite knowing his position, he's now trying to control Krishna, and he's ordering Krishna. My dear Krishna, he is not addressing as Krishna. Achyuta. Now you place my chariot between the two parties. This is ordering. That would mean Arjuna becoming the controller and Krishna becoming the controlled. Just the opposite. Therefore, Arjuna knows his subordinate position and he is ordering to Krishna. So indirectly, he is begging to be excused. And now listen to this. This is where it sort of comes out a little clearer. My dear Krishna, I cannot order you. The order must come from you. But, I'm adding the but, because you promised to carry out my order and you wanted to become my chariot driver, so I'm ordering. I'm not in a position to order, but you promised to carry out my order, and I think you are firm in your promise. Therefore, I'm asking you, achyuta, don't go back on your promise. Do you follow the idea? It's, a little subtle. But Krishna had promised to carry out the order of Arjuna, and therefore Arjuna felt, well, I must give an order. Otherwise, how can Krishna fulfill his promise if I don't give him a chance? So therefore I have to order. So please forgive me, my dear Krishna. Please forgive me. I cannot order you, but you've promised, and therefore I'm saying, achyuta, don't go back on your promise. So if we serve Krishna, that is our achyuta position. If we do not serve Krishna, that is vichyuta. fallen condition, achyuta and vichyuta. So to become Krishna conscious means achyuta gotra. Okay, anyway, he's not here. Means achyuta gotra, achyuta gotra. Gotra means of the same family. So we have to become achyuta gotra, again belonging to the family of Krishna. Aha. And Prabhupada elsewhere makes the point, this is a nice point also, another nice point. Krishna is not proud. He was not thinking that what will people think if I become a chariot driver? No king would lower himself to such a position. So Krishna was not thinking like that. Because, well, when you reach such a high position, I don't know that high position, but the higher position you reach, the less it matters if you do something on a lower level. People will just understand, oh, it's okay. You know, it's his pastime or something. Yeah, so Krishna was not proud. He wasn't thinking, what will people think if I become a chariot driver? And this is actually a very, very important point in Krishna consciousness. Just to look at this point of the relationship between Krishna and his great pure devotees like Arjuna. Krishna sometimes carrying out the order, taking a lesser position in front of the, of course, very great devotee. This is discussed. Of course, it's discussed in so many places, but one place it's discussed is by Srila Jiva Goswami in one of his books. It's called Sankalpa Kalpadruma. It's a pretty amazing book. Not a big book, but very deep. And right at the beginning of the book, Srila Jiva Goswami raises a question. He raises the question, why should we or anyone, why should anyone surrender to Krishna and give their lives to Krishna and become Krishna's devotee and just sort of hand themselves into the hands of Krishna? Now you do as you like with me. You may remember Prabhupada's prayer as he comes into the port, I think in Boston, first of all. Now make me dance, make me dance, make me dance as you like. So Jiva Goswami raises that extremely important question for all of us. Why should we surrender to Krishna and give our lives and everything to him? And then he answers the question. Well, what he does actually, he goes through a series of verses in, I think it's the first canto of the Bhagavatam, it's the Bhagavatam, where there's a whole list of qualities of Krishna. And when he comes to this quality, Bhaktavatsala, specifically this term is used, then Jiva Goswami concludes that this is the main reason that we should surrender, everyone should surrender to Krishna, because Krishna is so kind to his devotees. Krishna is so many wonderful things. There are 64 qualities of Krishna in Nectar of Devotion in the second part of second side of the ocean, the southern side. There's 64 qualities. And ultimately we understand there are unlimited qualities. But of all the qualities, this quality of Bhaktavatsala, being kind to his devotee, particularly for the devotees, this is by far the most prominent. And Srila Jiva Goswami, in order to substantiate this point, he actually gives a number of examples that just see how Krishna has done this in different ways. Just see how he was kind to the gopis. He embraced them. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So he danced with the gopis, he embraced the gopis. And the verse says, he never did this with the goddesses of fortune. How kind he was to the gopis. Then how kind he was, Krita Punya Punja. How kind he was to the cowherd boys. What did they do? It's inconceivable. What did they do, and for how many lives, to get to be able to play with Krishna as his friends? Krita Punya Punja, what pious activities? Punya meaning pious activities. So Srila Jiva Goswami gives these examples, and finally, the final example he gives, he speaks very famous verse from the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's spoken by Uddhava immediately after the disappearance of Lord Krishna from this world. And Uddhava there, it's third canto, chapter 2, verse, 23. Aho bakiyam stanakala kutam, jighamsaya payayad apyasadvi, lebhe gatim datri uchitam tatonyam, kam vadayalum sharanam vrajema. Alas, how shall I take shelter of one more merciful than he, who granted the position of mother to a she-demon, Putana, although she was unfaithful, and she prepared deadly poison to be sucked from her breast. So Srila Jiva Goswami, he gives 5 verses, in fact, 5 verses pointing out Krishna's mercy to different people. First the gopis, then Mother Yashoda, then the cowherd boys, then somebody else, and then he speaks this verse. How merciful the Lord was to Putana, who, if anyone didn't deserve mercy, it was her. She was such a horrible person. She came to try to kill him. But still, Krishna was so merciful to her that he accepted her, we could say, like a mother. Actually, the verse says he accepted her as Daitri. Daitri means nurse, like a nanny, specifically. But it's a motherly position. Krishna was that kind. So Jiva Goswami, yes, he he gives these examples and this example, how Krishna is Bhaktavatsala. And therefore, because he's so kind to the devotees, therefore we can surrender to him and feel secure. We will not be in danger. And it's interesting to note, you might note, that this verse is quoted in at least two places I'm aware of. This Aho Bhakiyam Stanakala Kutam about Krishna's mercy to Putana. It's quoted in two special places where it's being quoted has just totally overwhelming effect on some devotee, great devotee. One place is in or connected at least to Srimad Bhagavatam. If you're familiar with the story, Srila Vyasadeva in the beginning was instructed by Narada in Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he wanted to instruct his son Shukadeva also in Srimad Bhagavatam. But as soon as Shukadeva came out of the womb, he ran away. He just ran. And even though Vyasadeva chased after him, he couldn't catch him. But he really felt, I must teach this to my son, so we must bring him back. So what he did, he instructed some of his disciples to just go wandering around. They had not seen Shukadeva yet, because he had just come out of the womb just like that and headed for the hills on the spot. He didn't sit down for prasadam or to get introduced to anyone. Just out of the womb, and then he ran. So the other disciples didn't see him. So Vyasadeva told them, just walk around the area, the district, reciting these 5 verses, the same 5 verses. And particularly this last one about the Lord's mercy to Putana. So they did that. They wandered around chanting these 5 verses. Verses which are special for that reason, as we've said, because they show in the most special ways how Krishna's Bhaktavatsala. So they're just wandering around doing this, and then one time they noticed this one teenage boy completely naked suddenly became attracted when he heard that 5th verse. Suddenly he became attracted and he started following them. And Vyasa had told them, if you see some young, unusual looking boy following you while you're chanting, keep chanting and bring him back. Just come back to the ashram. So they did that. They kept chanting and just turned around and started heading back to Vyasadeva's ashram, and they brought him home. And then Vyasadeva instructed Shukadeva. This is, part of this, the last part definitely, how he came back and he got instructed. That's in the Bhagavatam. The other place is in the very extraordinary pastime. It's in Chaitanya Charitamrita, but it's in more detail in Chaitanya Bhagavat, in which Mukunda Dutt takes Gadadhar Pandit to visit Pundarik Vijayanidhi. Pundarik Vijayanidhi. Of course, we can bear in mind Gadadhar is Radharani. Pundarik Vijayanidhi is Vrishabhanu Maharaj, the father of Radharani. So they have a relationship. But Gadadhar apparently was not aware at that point that they had a relationship, but Mukunda told him that, this great devotee has arrived. Pundarik had just arrived from somewhere. Great devotee has arrived. I want to introduce you to him. So he took him to that place where Pundarik Vijayanidhi was. And Pundarik was reclining on some sort of like a couch or something. And he was being served, in very sort of intimate, well, not exactly intimate, but very personal ways by beautiful young women with different types of valuable paraphernalia. And he himself was dressed very opulently. And Gadadhar came in and saw, there he is, and thought, what? Him? He looks like an enjoyer. He's being treated like an enjoyer, and he's responding like an enjoyer, and he's dressed like an enjoyer. And he really became puzzled. Why did Mukunda tell me he's a great devotee and I should come here and meet him? And Mukunda saw the confusion being showed in the face of Gadadhar. So Mukunda said, wait a minute, just hold on, just wait a minute. And he recited that verse. It's described in Chaitanya Bhagavat, that Mukunda then recited that verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 3.2.23. And when he recited that verse, suddenly Pundarik became totally overwhelmed. From his reclining there in an apparently kind of luxurious type of situation, suddenly he became just wildly overwhelmed in ecstasy on hearing that verse. And he just threw himself on the floor and rolled back and forth, screaming, smashing things. That was the influence of that verse. And indeed, he carried on like that for quite some time. I forget exactly how long. It may have even been an hour or more, but it was just the most incredible manifestation of Krishna Prema. And Gadadhar, when he saw that, he felt, oh no, I have made a terrible offense. And then on that basis, Gadadhar decided, all right, to make up, there's only one way I can make up for this offense. I will accept Pundarik Vijayanidhi as my spiritual master. I will take initiation from him. And he did. So that verse is very special. And, we could do a whole seminar on this subject, actually, of how Krishna is Bhaktavatsala. But this is just a little bit of background on it. So Krishna now is acting as Bhaktavatsala. So now we go on to verse 23. Let's read verse 23. So now he's speaking to Krishna. Let me see those who have come here to fight. wishing to please the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra. You know, on one hand, he already knows. It's already well known. So some say that this, when he asks Krishna, please take my chariot in between the armies so I can see. Some devotees say that this is the first sign of weakness on his part, because pretty much he knows. He doesn't need to see, oh, look, there's such and such. It's well known who is on whose side, particularly amongst the main warriors. But having said that, Prabhupada also does mention that he wanted to see. He wanted to see them to make an estimate of the strength which he had to face. Let me see those who have come here to fight, wishing to please the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra. And Prabhupada acknowledges in the purport all the others who are there on Duryodhana's side. They must be the same. Prabhupada says, all persons who joined the side of Duryodhana must have been birds of the same feather. Okay, so on to verse 24. And this is where Arjuna, Sanjaya speaks again. And Sanjaya refers to Arjuna as Gudakesha. This is now verse 24. Sanjay said, O descendant of Bharat, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Krishna drew up the fine chariot in the midst of the armies of both parties. So in the purport, Prabhupada, practically at least pretty, maybe half or slightly more of the purport is just Prabhupada talking about Arjuna as Gudakesha. Gudaka means sleep, and one who conquers sleep is called Gudakesh. Sleep also means ignorance. So Arjuna conquered both sleep and ignorance because of his friendship with Krishna. As a great devotee of Krishna, he could not forget Krishna even for a moment, because that is the nature of a devotee. Either in waking or in sleep, a devotee of the Lord can never be free from thinking of Krishna's name for qualities and pastimes, and so on. So thus a devotee can conquer sleep and ignorance. And Krishna again is addressed as Rishikesh, but this time by Sanjay. Anyway, okay. And Prabhupada notes that as Rishikesh, or the director of the senses and the mind of every living entity, Krishna could understand Arjuna's purpose in placing the chariot in the midst of the armies, and Krishna is just about to speak. Is he? Yeah, Krishna is just about to speak for the first time. I want to, there's a story, Prabhupada actually tells a story from Mahabharata, a story behind the name Gudakesh, that when Arjuna was studying under his guru Dronacharya, Drona ordered his servant never to allow Arjuna to eat in the dark. I don't know if you're aware of any explanation on that. I'm not. But anyway, Drona ordered the servant, don't let Arjuna eat in the dark. One night, however, the wind blew out his light while he was eating, and Arjuna continued to eat in the dark out of habit. He then realized that if he could eat in the dark, why couldn't he practice archery in the dark? From that time, he used to practice shooting at night. So he is called Gudakesh, conqueror of sleep. And here's an interesting little tidbit from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur from his purport to this verse. Here is the significance of the word Gudakesh. Akesha means Vishnu, Brahma, Ka, and Shiva, Isha. Haribol. Gudakesh means Arjuna, who gives them, Akesha, the experience of the sweetness of the Lord's affection. Just as sugar, Guda, sugar, which is also known as Guda, gives the experience of sweetness. Therefore, Gudakesh refers to he who, by bringing Krishna under his control in this, by having Krishna drive the chariot, by bringing Krishna under his control, gave Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva the opportunity to experience Krishna's sweetness. Krishna, Krishna. Okay. So on to verse number 25. In the presence of Bhishma, Drona, and all the other chieftains of the world, the Lord said, just behold, Partha, all the Kurus assembled here. So, I'd say it's worth noting that this is the first place where Krishna speaks in Bhagavad Gita. It's the first place. Yeah. And one comment made by, if I remember correctly, Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan, he says the term pramukhata, which is translated here as in front of them. Pramukhata, mukh means face. Pramukhata means right in front of their faces. So again, Krishna is, Krishna is Rishikesh. He's still functioning as Rishikesh. Prabhupada explains that. So the use of the word Rishikesh indicates that he knew everything. He knows what's going on in Arjuna's mind. And the word Partha, meaning the son of Pritha or Kunti, is similarly significant. He wanted to inform Arjuna that because Arjuna was the son of Pritha, the sister of his own father, Vasudeva. And note the spelling. Did you note the spelling last night? Krishna's father was spelt as Vasudeva, but it's actually Vasudeva. And here it's spelt Vasudeva. So, the sister of his own father, Vasudeva, Krishna, had agreed to be the charioteer of Arjuna. Now, what did Krishna mean when he told Arjuna, behold the Kurus? Did Arjuna want to stop there and not fight? Krishna never expected such things from the son of his aunt Pritha. The mind of Arjuna was thus predicted by the Lord in friendly joking. And a point also which is mentioned by one of our acharyas is that Drona and Bhishma are mentioned by name by Krishna, because they are the two who on the other side, who Arjuna is most attached to. So then we go on to verse 26. There Arjuna could see within the midst of the armies of both parties his fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, friends, and also his fathers-in-law and well-wishers. Yes. So he could see Bhurishrava. Well, Prabhupada explains, people like Bhurishrava, who was his father's contemporary, grandfathers Bhishma and Somadatta, teachers like Dronacharya and Kripacharya, maternal uncles like Shalya and Shakuni, brothers like Duryodhana, sons like Lakshman, friends like Ashvatthama, well-wishers like Kritavarma, etc. And he could also see many of his friends. So now we come to verse 27. And Arjuna, this is the last verse in this little section. And Arjuna starts to actually manifest his bewilderment or compassion, or let's just say bewilderment, confusion. So 27, when the son of Kunti, Arjuna, saw all these different grades of friends and relatives, he became overwhelmed with compassion and spoke thus. Wow, what did Arjuna say? Hare Krishna. Tune in tomorrow and find out what Arjuna said. But sure, it's pretty amazing. One point we can just draw out from this, from the Sanskrit. He became overwhelmed with compassion, kripaya. This is how Bhagavad Gita describes, at least initially, the state of mind of Arjuna as he becomes very emotional and gets very carried away about things. It's compassion, but it's not just compassion, it's kripaya paraya. You can see actually in the word for word, paraya, para, meaning superior. It was a high grade of compassion, an elevated type of compassion. And even though, we'll go through tomorrow and Monday, all the verses, so many of the verses where Arjuna expresses his different ideas why he shouldn't fight. But it is noteworthy that despite the fact that even though Krishna himself, when we get into chapter 2, he starts chastising Arjuna, his mode of dealing with Arjuna is basically one of chastisement. But still, Srila Prabhupada, in a couple of the purports, there's more than one, Srila Prabhupada points out that in certain ways, Arjuna was displaying the elevated, compassionate, sensitive consciousness of an advanced devotee, actually. Yeah. Krishna's mood, though, was more as a spiritual master to chastise and not just pat on the back and say, oh, you're speaking so nicely. But anyway, we'll see over the next tomorrow night and Monday night. So final point, for those of you who are doing Bhakti Shastri, there's a special question based on this verse 27. And it's related to, just a moment, it's related to Srimad Bhagavatam 10:5-28. Note that down without fail. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So yeah, we'll just take 1 or 2 minutes to just read through this question, the verse. It's verse 10th canto, chapter 5, verse 28. And it looks like it's the verse itself. Yeah. When one's friends and relatives are properly situated, one's religion, economic development, and sense gratification, as described in the Vedic literatures, are beneficial. Otherwise, if one's friends and relatives are in distress, these 3 cannot offer any happiness. The 3 being your religion, economic development, and sense gratification. If your friends and relatives are in distress, these 3 cannot offer any happiness. So you then, devotees, the question is, what are these 3 things? So you look up that verse and you note these things down. All right. So there you go, devotees. And tomorrow we will go into the second main section of the first chapter, from verse 28 to the end, verse 46, Arjuna's dilemma. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.